No water, no chance. The people who refuse to listen to reason are the ones who discover secrets no expert ever could. It immediately sets up tension, stakes, and curiosity while highlighting Ryan's determination. Before we start, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments. Now, let's get into the story. Ryan Carter didn't believe in miracles. He believed in patterns, in hard work, in things that could be explained with effort and logic. That was how his father had raised him on their Kansas farm. You don't wait for luck, Thomas Carter used to say. Leaning on his shovel at sunrise, you work until something changes. And for most of Ryan's life, that had been true. The land had always responded. You planted, you watered, you waited, and eventually something grew. It wasn't magic. It was a system, a rhythm between effort and reward. Ryan grew up trusting that rhythm so deeply that he never imagined it could break. But it did. At first, the changes were subtle. Rainfall shifted just slightly off schedule. Crops took longer to grow. The soil felt different, less rich, less alive. His father noticed, of course. He always noticed, but he didn't panic. Farmers were used to adapting. One bad season didn't mean the end. Except the bad season didn't end. It stretched into another, then another. The well that had supported their farm for decades began to weaken. Water pressure dropped. Irrigation slowed. Crops struggled harder each year. Ryan remembered the first time he saw real concern in his father's eyes. It wasn't during a storm or a failed harvest. It was one quiet morning when they checked the well together. The bucket came up lighter than it should have. His father didn't say anything at first, just stared into the dark opening. Jaw tight, shoulders stiff. That silence said everything. Still, Thomas Carter didn't quit. He worked harder, longer hours, smarter methods. He researched, experimented, adjusted. For a while, it seemed like he might beat whatever was happening. But nature doesn't negotiate. By the time Ryan turned 20, the farm was barely holding on. By 23, it wasn't holding at all. And then his father was gone. The official reason was illness, but Ryan knew better. It wasn't just the body that had failed. It was the weight of watching everything he built slowly slip away. The land, the crops, the legacy, all fading in front of him. Now Ryan stood alone in the middle of that same land, except it didn't feel like the same place anymore. The soil had turned pale and brittle, cracked into uneven patterns that stretched across acres like scars. The fields that once moved like green waves in the wind now sat still and lifeless. Even the air felt different, dry, heavy, empty. It didn't just look dead. It felt forgotten. Most people had already given up on it. Neighbors sold their land months ago. Some moved to cities. Others simply walked away, leaving behind empty houses and broken fences. Ryan stayed, not because it made sense, but because leaving felt worse. You're wasting your time, one neighbor told him one afternoon, leaning against his truck. There's nothing left here. Ryan didn't argue, because logically, they were right. There was no water, no crops, no income, no future. Still, he stayed, a week. Later, the experts arrived. They came with equipment that looked expensive enough to guarantee answers. Ground scanners, digital mapping systems, devices designed to see what human eyes couldn't. Ryan watched them from a distance, arms crossed, trying not to hope too much. Hope was dangerous. The lead expert, Dr. Collins, eventually approached him. He looked professional, confident, the kind of man who had delivered bad news many times before. "We've completed a full scan of your property," he said. Ryan nodded slowly, and Dr. Collins hesitated for just a second, then spoke plainly. "There's no viable water source beneath your land." The words hit harder than Ryan expected. Not because they were surprising, but because they were final. "No chance?" Ryan asked quietly. The man shook his head. "Not one worth risking your resources. I've seen land like this. Once it dries out this completely, it doesn't recover. Ryan looked out across the field, the same field his father once called alive. Science had spoken, and it said the land was finished. By evening, the trucks were gone. The dust they left behind slowly settled, leaving Ryan alone again with the silence. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he walked to the old well, the same one he had stood beside years ago with his father. He looked down into it, expecting nothing, and finding exactly that: darkness, dryness, emptiness. proof. For the first time, Ryan felt something shift inside him, not anger, not sadness, but something heavier. Acceptance. Maybe this was it. Maybe the land really was dead. That night, he sat on the wooden steps outside his house, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped below it. The sky turned shades of orange and purple, beautiful in a way that almost felt unfair given everything else. He thought about selling. For the first time, he seriously considered it. Walking away, starting over somewhere else, somewhere easier, somewhere with water. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. And yet, it didn't sit right, because every time he tried to accept it, something inside him resisted, not emotionally, but instinctively. Like a part of him knew something he couldn't explain. He looked out at the land again, his eyes moving slowly across the familiar space. And then he noticed it. A small patch near the far edge of the field. Nothing obvious, no color difference, no visible change. But the ground dipped slightly, there just enough to catch his attention. Ryan frowned. He had walked this land his entire life. If something felt different, there was a reason. He stood up slowly, his heart beating just a little faster now. Every logical part of his brain told him to ignore it. The experts had already given him the answer. No water. But logic wasn't the only thing guiding him anymore. There was something else, something older, quieter, something his father used to trust without question. Instinct. Ryan walked to the shed and pushed the door open. Inside, everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. Tools his father once used, daily now, sat untouched, frozen in time. His eyes landed on the shovel. Old, worn, reliable. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. It felt real in a way nothing else did right now. He stepped back outside and looked toward that spot again. One patch of land, one idea, one decision. If he was wrong, this was it. The last of his savings, the last of his energy, gone. No recovery after this. Ryan tightened his grip on the shovel. Fear crept in, but so did something else, resolve. Because deep down, he realized something important in that moment. He wasn't just deciding whether to dig, he was deciding whether to quit. Ryan took a slow breath, then started walking toward that patch of ground. The air felt cooler now, the sky darker, the world quieter. Each step felt heavier than the last. But he didn't stop. When he reached the spot, he paused. The ground looked just like everywhere else. Dry, cracked, lifeless. Nothing special, nothing promising. Nothing, except a feeling. He stood there for a long moment, doubt pressing hard against his chest. What if this is nothing? What if they're right? What if this is the moment I lose everything? Ryan closed his eyes. Then he remembered his father's voice. Land remembers. His eyes opened again, clear now. Decision made. He raised the shovel, and with everything on the line, he drove it into the ground for the very first time. The first strike felt heavier than Ryan expected. Not because the ground was tough, though. It was but because of what it meant. That single motion wasn't just digging. It was a commitment. A line drawn between giving up and risking everything on something no one else believed in. The shovel scraped through the top layer of dry soil, breaking it apart with a dull, brittle sound. Dust lifted into the air with each movement, catching faint light from the rising sun. Ryan didn't stop to think. He just kept going. One scoop, then another. At first, it felt manageable. The upper soil was loose, almost deceptive, like it wanted to make things easy. But Ryan knew better. Land like this didn't give anything without a fight. Within an hour, sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands tightened around the shovel handle, muscles straining with every lift and throw. The hole was barely a foot deep, but already, his body was reminding him what this would cost. Still, he didn't stop, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking brought doubt. By midday, the sun was high and unforgiving. Heat pressed down on him from above, while dry air clawed at his throat. The ground grew harder with every inch. Each strike of the shovel now sent vibrations through his arms, forcing him to push harder, dig deeper, refuse to slow down. Neighbors passed by on the distant road. Some slowed down, some stared. A few laughed. Ryan heard them, but he didn't react. He had already expected this. To them, he wasn't determined. He was desperate. And desperation looked a lot like foolishness from the outside. Still trying. Someone shouted from a truck window as it rolled past. "There's nothing there, man." Ryan didn't answer. He drove the shovel into the ground again. By evening, the hole was nearly 5 feet deep. It didn't look like much compared to the effort it had taken, but Ryan could feel the difference. His body ached in ways it hadn't in years. His shoulders burned. His palms had started to tear, thin lines of raw skin forming beneath the dust. He climbed out slowly, breathing hard, and looked down at what he had done. Just dirt. No moisture. No change. No sign of anything. For a moment, doubt crept in again. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just quiet enough to linger. He shook it off and walked back to the house. That night, sleep didn't come easy. His body was exhausted, but his mind wasn't. Every thought circled the same question. What if this is a mistake? He turned in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the land outside. No wind, no movement, no sound of water, just emptiness. By morning, his muscles protested every movement. Even lifting his arms felt like work. For a brief second, he considered taking a break. Just one day. Recover. Think. But he knew how that would end. One day would turn into two into a week, and eventually, he'd stop altogether. Ryan pushed himself up. No breaks. Not now, ... He walked back to the pit, shovel in hand, determination overriding pain. Day 2 was harder. The ground had changed. It was denser now, packed tighter, resisting every strike. Each inch required more effort than the last. Ryan had to adjust his stance, his grip, his rhythm, learning as he went, adapting not just physically but mentally. This wasn't just digging anymore. It was endurance. By midday, his hands were blistered badly. Skin had torn open, leaving raw patches that stung with every movement. Blood mixed with dirt, forming a rough, uncomfortable layer across his palms. He wrapped them in cloth, kept going. At 8 feet, nothing. At 10 feet, still nothing. The hole was deep enough now that climbing in and out became a task of its own. Ryan had to carve small footholds into the sides just to move efficiently. The deeper he went, the more isolated it felt, like the world above was slowly disappearing. But he didn't stop, because now it wasn't just about finding water. It was about proving something to himself, that he could finish what he started. By the 3rd day, word had spread. More people stopped to watch, not out of support, but curiosity. "How far are you going?" one man asked, standing at the edge of the pit. Ryan didn't look up. "Until I'm done," the man chuckled. "You already are." Ryan kept digging. Each comment, each laugh, each doubtful look, it all blended into the background. Noise, irrelevant. The only thing that mattered now was the next strike. And the one after that? At 15 feet, Ryan stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because his body forced him to. He leaned against the dirt wall, chest rising and falling rapidly, arms shaking from exhaustion. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with dust, leaving streaks across his skin. He looked around. Nothing. The soil was the same, dry, lifeless. 15 feet down and still no sign of water. For the first time since he started, the doubt didn't whisper. It spoke clearly. This is pointless. Ryan slid down to the ground, sitting in the bottom of the pit, staring at the dirt in front of him. 15 feet. 3 days. Everything he had, and nothing to show for it. The experts were right. The neighbors were right. Even logic was right. There was nothing here. He let out a slow breath, closing his eyes. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was where it ended. Not with failure, but with reality. Ryan stayed there longer than he realized. Time blurred in the stillness. The world above felt distant now, almost unreal. Finally, he opened his eyes again. The silence was different down here. He reached out, pressing his hand against the dirt wall beside him. Rough, dry, unchanging. Or was it? Ryan frowned slightly. He pressed again, this time slower, more deliberate. There was something, subtle, almost unnoticeable, but different. The soil felt cooler, not wet, not soft, just cooler. Ryan pulled his hand back, staring at it as if it might explain what he just felt. It didn't. For a second, he almost ignored it, almost convinced himself it didn't matter. But then that instinct, quiet, persistent, pushed back. Pay attention. Ryan leaned forward, brushing away a thin layer of dirt with his fingers. Slowly, carefully, the texture didn't change much, but the temperature did. Slightly, just enough to notice. His heartbeat picked up, not from excitement, from uncertainty. What does this mean? He didn't know. But it was the first thing that wasn't completely lifeless. The first difference, the first possibility. Ryan stood up slowly, ignoring the pain in his legs, grabbing the shovel again. His grip tightened, his mind sharpened. Everything came down to this moment. Because now it wasn't just blind effort anymore. Now, there was a reason to believe. He raised the shovel, drove it into the ground with renewed force. Again, each strike harder than the last, each second heavier with expectation. The soil resisted, but something had changed. Ryan could feel it. Not see it, not prove it, but feel it. And that was enough, because for the first time since he started, he wasn't just digging out of stubbornness. He was digging because something down there was finally starting to answer back.
Ryan's arms burned like fire, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. He could feel it now, a subtle change in the soil, a faint vibration, almost like the earth itself was breathing beneath him. He had dug deeper than anyone thought possible, deeper than logic said was worth it. And now something was waiting. The shovel struck a hollow sound. It was different from the usual dull thuds of dry dirt. Ryan froze. Heart hammering, he knelt down and cleared away the loose soil with his hands. The ground beneath was cooler, damper than it should have been. A thin, almost invisible trickle of water, pooled in a small depression at the bottom of the pit. At first he thought it was an illusion, just moisture clinging to the dirt. But as he scraped a little more, the trickle widened. Tiny beads of water glimmered in the sunlight, filtering down the pit. The faint sound of running water reached his ears, and for the first time in days, Ryan allowed himself to breathe a little easier. His mind raced, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. Could this be real? Could he have actually found water where every expert said none existed? He pressed his hand into the flow. It was cold, pure, life-giving. The soil around it gave way, allowing the trickle to grow into a steady stream. Dirt washed into the pit, but Ryan didn't care. He barely noticed. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't stop digging. Each strike of the shovel now felt lighter, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer joy of discovery. The pit that had seemed endless now felt alive. Water continued to flow, pooling at the base and seeping into the surrounding soil. He could hear it, feel it, see it, life returning to a place that had been declared dead. Neighbors who had passed by countless times before to laugh or shake their heads now stopped in disbelief. They stared silently as Ryan knelt in the pit, scooping water in his hands and letting it run through his fingers. Some whispered, some muttered, but no one spoke too loudly. This wasn't just digging, it was witnessing a miracle born from persistence, intuition, and sheer determination. Ryan leaned back, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the flowing water. He thought of his father, of the years of lessons about trusting the land, about patience, about listening even when it seemed impossible. Thomas Carter would have smiled at this moment, proud not because of the water alone, but because Ryan had learned what he always tried to teach. The land remembers, but only for those who don't give up. By sunset, the trickle had become a small spring, steady and clear. The barren field around it seemed to shimmer differently, almost as if it recognized the water that now ran beneath it. Ryan stood at the edge of the pit, muddy, exhausted, but triumphant. Every ache, every doubt, every insult or warning from the experts had led to this moment. And as the light faded across the Kansas horizon, Ryan realized something profound.
This discovery wasn't just about water. It was about resilience, about trusting one's instincts, about refusing to let logic, fear, or public opinion dictate the limits of possibility. He had risked everything, and in doing so, had found more than life for the farm he had, found proof that courage and perseverance could carve miracles out of even the harshest circumstances. Ryan stood there, hands on his hips, staring at the flowing spring, a smile breaking across his face. For the first time in years, he felt alive in this land again, not because it had given him water, but because he had proven to himself that giving up was never an option. The world could doubt him, experts could be wrong, neighbors could laugh, but Ryan had learned the most important lesson. Sometimes, the only thing standing between failure and discovery is the courage to dig. One more time, and he wasn't done digging yet.